Hi everyone, I'm Leah Thompson, one of the Vice Presidents in the Students' Union, and today I'm here with...
My name's Gareth Green and I'm one of the student advisors as part of the Student Life Advice team.
So today we're here to talk about SIPs, and if you don't know what a SIP is, that is a Student Inclusion Plan. So I suppose just to get right into it, could you explain to me, Gareth, what a SIP is?
Yeah, so Student Inclusion Plan SIP is basically a method through which we look at putting in reasonable adjustments for students around specifically their sort of class and their exam and their coursework and their course related support. So common adjustments that we tend to look at are things like having extra time during exams, having additional tutorial support during classrooms and that sort of thing, coursework support and around those sort of extensions to deadlines. They're the sort of the ones that people are quite commonly know about, but then obviously there are other things we can look at as well.
So in general, who are SIPs for?
So potentially they're for anybody that requires an adjustment put into their course. We usually say that there needs to be medical grounds for it. However, that is not exclusively the case. It's really about what's the need of the student. Based on that, we will then look at what reasonable adjustments, and the key there is reasonable. I think we can cover that a little bit later, but reasonable is what we're always looking at. So if it's going to be beneficial to a student and it's not going to be detrimental to anyone else, we will be favourable towards that and try and make sure that that can be implemented.
Yeah, so sort of like getting some extra time because you need the extra time rather than I don't have to do my exams.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. Extra time is usually, as long as we can explain why that's a benefit, is usually going to be something that's quite easy to approve because understandably there's not going to be anyone that's negatively impacted by that, but there is going to be somebody that's going to benefit from it.
Yeah, of course. So if a student is watching this now and they think that they might need a SIP for whatever reason, how would they go about getting one?
So there is, as with pretty much everything now, a route through Solve. I know some people find that a lot easier than others, and we do recognise that certain students with certain needs might find that more difficult. In the first instance, we'd always say go to Solve because there is a quite straightforward questionnaire that you can follow that outlines what you are hoping to get from a SIP, what condition you've got, if you have got a diagnosed condition, if you haven't, what sort of things are affecting you, so that we can then look to because what we will then do is we'll have a meeting with that student to discuss a SIP in more general detail. We can then sort of build upon it, and an important thing I always say when I meet with students about SIPs is that they're not set in stone, they're collaborative, and if we put things in now and as we move through more things become beneficial, we will continue to review.
So if something's not working, they can come back and work it out. That's great. So I guess something that I didn't know is like for me, when I was a student, I always thought it was something that you needed to have a diagnosis for, 100% locked in. Is that not the case?
So obviously a diagnosis will help us provide more specific support, and there will be certain elements of support, especially if you're looking at things through DSA, for example,
of course.
where that diagnosis is essential. But for things like, say for example, a student has met with wellbeing and they've identified some concerns, some issues. There's no diagnosis, but they've had that conversation. They can then come to us and we can look at putting in maybe an interim SIP, a short-term one, and that could just be for 12 months, and then we'll say, because we know also getting a diagnosis can be very difficult. So we can say, right, well, let's put these in now, and that gives you then time to speak to your GP, speak to wellbeing, look at these different options, and these different things that are happening more more generally. And then in 12 months' time, we'll reevaluate. It might just be that we continue because you still haven't got a diagnosis. It might be that you've got a diagnosis and we can add things in. It's really, as I say, it's a collaborative process.
Oh, that's really great. I mean, I think as well, there is sometimes some things that people think about getting a SIP that aren't necessarily true. So, for example, I know you mentioned before that it's collaborative and it's based on the needs, and I think in some areas of the university, the perception of SIPs is very much, this is my time extension, rather than, like, this is something that helps me. So could you think of any other things that people could get as part of their adjustments? for people that might think that?
Yeah, so as you say, what we tend to do is we tend to look at how are these adjustments going to support. So it's extensions to deadlines can be because we know students might have a number of deadlines all coming together and it has an overwhelming effect. So we know students who have ADHD or anxiety or suspected, it might not be a diagnosis, but it's something that they are being treated for or being tested for without actually having a formal diagnosis. That request to put in an extension to the deadline still has to be approved by the academic. It's still it's a recommendation, and that adjustment isn't a guarantee, but it gives that opportunity to have that conversation, have that understanding with your academics. So that's where we tend to look at it. Another thing that I think is always really important when we talk about student inclusion plans is to then meet with your academic mentor, your course leader, somebody in the academic team, because each course is slightly different. The way they can implement these adjustments is going to differ depending on what course you're on. So you need to be able to have that that back and forth with your academics. This isn't, you get your SIP, that's not the end of it. It's just one step in that process to ensure that you're supported as much as possible.
So in terms of if someone has a SIP, is that something that they should go and speak to their academic about?
Definitely, anytime I've sort of met with a student and they've approved their student inclusion plan, the next step I always advise is make an appointment with your academic mentor or your course leader or whoever, or your module leader, somebody that you're having sort of regular contact with, to discuss what that SIP means for you and how that's going to implement.
I guess in some cases as well, I know you talked before about how sometimes it's about reasonable adjustments rather than this is the thing that works perfectly for me. So I guess in some cases there'll be some more complex situations. For example, if someone might have to have lectures recorded, but in that case they might be on a course that discusses a lot of sensitive topics and personal things that can't really be recorded. Would it be about working around that to find things that work instead?
So this is why I say being collaborative with the academic is key, because it might be that you can record some things in that lecture or in that particular environment, but there needs to be a trigger to say, right, this is no longer appropriate to record, we're going to have to stop any recording, and then a trigger to say, right, we can start again. But that's the collaboration. It's not a dictating that they must do this or they must not. It's how can this work, because we know there's a reason you need that recording, but there also has to be that protection of people's personal information and sensitive subjects.
And let's say, for example, a student is feeling that they maybe can't approach their academic about it, or they feel like they might need something else. It's always that back and forth, isn't it? So they can come back to you guys.
So I mean, again, the decision's going to live with the academic team. So we will always put recognise how important that's going to be. But we can help facilitate that. I mean, ultimately, if they're not going to, if these recommendations that we've suggested aren't going to be implemented, then there's a question of why make the recommendations, why suggest these adjustments if they can't be implemented. And the adjustments that we do recommend have been scrutinised. So we wouldn't expect academics to be pushing back, and in our experience, it's rare that happens. But obviously, if that is the case, we need to know, because it could speak to a bigger thing as well. So we would want to then sort of have a conversation with the academics to say, from our perspective, from an inclusion perspective, what's creating this potential, what's creating this problem, so that we can then look to see what adjustments can be made to mitigate.
And it could even be something like it's a group project, and you can't have an extension for everyone. There are certain areas where that's going to become restrictive because of the very nature of the assessment. That makes complete sense when you think about it. So if a student's watching this right now and they're thinking, oh, I need a SIP, but I don't know when I should apply for one, when should a student apply for one?
So there's no perfect time, but sooner the better. If you think you need one, then there's probably a reason you think that, and come and talk to us, because we can sort of investigate that. If you've got no diagnosis, we can put you in touch with diagnostic assessors who can assess for things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, some attention conditions, there is a sort of a list of things they can't do. So they can't do things like autism and sort of medically
It's
diagnosed.
a bit more of a complex process.
But
yeah.
nevertheless, a needs assessment can identify certain characteristics. So even if they can't diagnose, they might make recommendations based on those characteristics. So we can look at that. As I say, we can also look at putting in things that are temporary, because if we're discussing with a student what's creating problems for them or causing them issues when they're either in exams or in class or whatever, and we can see an appropriate adjustment that doesn't need a diagnosis at that stage, we can do that as well. So it's about coming to us as early as possible in that. Similarly, if they have a new diagnosis or something happens and it's a short-term condition, they can come to us for a SIP. I mean, if somebody breaks their leg, we can put a SIP in and a risk assessment. We need to do those things anyway. So for a risk assessment, so come to us and have a SIP as well, because it might be that there's some things that you're going to need. It doesn't have to be because you've got a diagnosed condition that's long-standing. It could just be an injury.
Yeah, and I guess it's about being open and honest, but also not leaving things till too late.
Yeah.
So like, don't apply for a SIP right before your deadlines. That's not a good idea.
No. The exams team have quite strict cut-off dates for adjustments, just because of the logistical impact of them making those adjustments. So we as a team will reach out to students quite sort of earnestly in the lead up to try and get those things sorted. But if you've got concerns, it is better to get to us as early as possible.
Yeah. You heard it here first, folks. Don't apply right before your exam.
Nope.
Not a good idea. Well, is there anything else that you think that people should know about SIPs?
No, I think that's sort of covered everything. Like I say, the easiest and the most appropriate way to apply for them is to do it through Solve. But if students are struggling with that, obviously we do have our sort of front of house team in the Science Centre who will be able to sort of navigate. We have drop-ins. So at the moment we do drop-ins on a Thursday afternoon, so students can come to us and we can sort of start navigating towards things that way as well. So there's plenty of opportunities, I think, for people to ask for that help. But just ask for it.
All right. Well, I think we've covered about everything. So thank you for coming here
Not a problem at all.
And hopefully you've learned something new if you didn't know anything about SIPs already, or if you did and maybe there's just something that you've never heard before. So thank you, everyone.